Okay, I left one thing hanging in the last session, and that was I mentioned the teacher's name. And I didn't mention many other names, so there must be a reason for that, right? The young guy who knocked on our door was named Ian. And the girlfriend that he said, "What have you done?" was named Anne. But the teacher who had invited us there was named Roberta, Robbie. And we got to know her more and more, and we got to know Ian more and more. And after Ian came back from Afghanistan, they got married. So when we go to Uganda now and stay in Kampala, we stay in their house. And they're a wonderful, world-changing couple. So it's a pleasure to have introduced them to one another. We remind them from time to time that they owe us. In the end, we left Northern Ireland with Ian and a few others who had come to the Lord or had experienced Him in a deeper way during our time there, and they formed a part of our team. We picked up a couple more people in England. We picked up a few more, some Americans who joined us that we'd corresponded with or talked to when we were in the States. And in the end, when we left Switzerland, headed for Afghanistan, we had 15 people. And we had 15 seats. And then we had a pickup type bed on the truck that we outfitted for sleeping and carrying all of our goods. It was quite a clever setup. And we drove to Afghanistan, which you can't do anymore. It was a terrific adventure. It was my third time of doing those roads. I've been over and back, and now we're going out again. And we learned quite a lot about how to go, and learned quite a lot about teamwork, working together and all. And once you've really failed, like I did the first time, big time, and you know that you just can't do this without God's help, you become much more reliant upon the Lord when you know that without His help you fail. And this time, partly because Riona and Marty were such, and there was another girl there, a nurse named Evie, they were such intercessors and such wise supporters. This time we had such a good team and such good unity, and we traveled well, and we paced ourselves, and we got there fairly quickly. And before long, we were entering back into Afghanistan. And the previous year, I'd had a fairly unsettling experience at the border, in that we were on a small team. I told you it didn't turn out very well, but we did a few things that were fruitful. One of the things is when we went through Tehran in Iran, some workers there with Operation Mobilization said, "Would you take this literature into Afghanistan?" And we said, "Sure." It was a lot. It weighed our little Volkswagen down, and it filled up all the space that we weren't sitting in, because it was just thousands of Gospels of John in Farsi and Urdu, I think, but in some of the local languages. And then there was also a tract that just stated what the Quran said about Jesus and what the Quran said about Muhammad. It just compared them. Not a good thing to do, going into a Muslim country. But we were ignorant. We didn't know what the stuff said. Did they take advantage of us? Maybe a little bit. We didn't know we were going into a country that was quite as restrictive as it is and was. And we didn't know what the literature said. They just said, "Would you take this in to our friends in Kabul?" We said, "Sure." So when we got to the border and we went through the usual border search of our vehicle, because so many Western young people were going through that time carrying drugs, they always did a thorough search. They came up with this literature, and they were very upset. So they trained their guns on us and arrested us. This was in 1970. So it was really quite humorous, because I was never really very, very scared or nervous about it, because it was all a little bit of like Keystone Cops, it was a bit of humor about it, because the soldier they had guarding us had one of these long kind of World War II era rifles with a bayonet on the end. So it was too long to go into our car, and he didn't have any transportation, so he was coming with us in our car to keep a guard on us, and then put us into some sort of house arrest when we got to Herat. So, it was really quite quite a funny slapstick comedy routine of trying to get this guy get his gun with his bayonet into our Volkswagen. But we got to Herat, and we were under house arrest. And you have no idea how long this is going to be and how it's going to turn out. But the way it turned out is that they gathered 12 elders from that particular province of Herat, and they spent 2 days reading all the literature we had. So they all read the Gospels, and they read about Jesus. And at the end of it, they called us in and they said, these are our holy books, and you're very welcome. But we don't think you should be taking in this one with comparisons of Jesus and Muhammad. So they kept that one. But all the rest of the Gospels, thousands and thousands of Gospels, we took with us on into Kabul. And that's the first time, we learned later, that any amount of Christian literature of any significance had ever been taken into Afghanistan. Anyway, approaching that border, I was still just a little bit nervous, what would happen this time, but we got through just fine. This time, how do I say this? We were just more spiritually alert. And I think we were more of a threat to the kingdom of darkness. I think it works like this, that people who are not spiritually alert and who are not sharp and obedient to the Lord and filled with the Spirit are not a threat to the kingdom of darkness, and you can go through this world hardly ever seeing anything to do with the demonic and the kingdom of darkness. You see very few expressions or manifestations in people's lives. But when you're sold out to the Lord and you prayed up, you see more. And that's kind of what happened here. In fact, let me tell you another story. We met some friends who were from a very conservative Christian background. And as they began to really, they faced the fact that their ministry was quite barren. They had a pretty good church, but they were dealing with the same problems, with the same people year in and year out, the same pastoral problems, the same weaknesses and sins and issues in people's lives. And they started really seeking God for answers. Started fasting and praying, getting real serious. And what happens when you do that? Well, the Lord convicts you, and you start getting cleaned up. And so they went through this whole lengthy process of God convicting them, 2 pastors and their wives, going through this together and growing and growing and growing. And they came to a point where they had never seen anything demonic in their life. But after a while, everywhere they went, they were saying demonic things. They said, it was the weirdest thing. You could go in the same supermarket you'd gone in for the last 15 years, walking down the aisle, minding your own business, and a lady shopper turns and hisses at you. What's going on? Well, the presence of Jesus in us, when He's intensified in us, He makes the powers of darkness pretty uncomfortable. Isn't that what happened with Jesus Himself? Yeah? Just reading it this morning in my gospel reading, how Jesus would come into an area and people who were demonized would come rushing with the demons crying out, "We know who you are. You're the Son of God. Why have you come to torture us?" Jesus wasn't doing anything, just being Himself, making the kingdom of darkness very uncomfortable. Good question, isn't it? Do I make the kingdom of darkness very uncomfortable? Well, that second year, first year we hadn't. Second year in Afghanistan, 71, yeah. The powers of darkness were uncomfortable. So what do? Well, they try to strike fear in our hearts. Second or third night, because when you go to Afghanistan, you go into the border with Iran, come from Mashhad into Herat, and then the road loops down through the Kandahar area. If you've been following any of the terrible warfare in Afghanistan over the last decade or more, it's that area you drive through, and then back up to Kabul. Second night, we were out in the middle of the desert. And the desert in Afghanistan then, I think still now, is really deserted. There's nothing out there. There's no trains or anything in Afghanistan. There's just the one Russian tarmac road at that point. It was barely 2 lanes wide, and we were driving that road, very little traffic on it, driving through the night. And we would take shifts. There was one other driver and myself, and we were the two. And I wore contacts at the time, and so I was out in the headlamps putting my contacts in because I was coming on to drive. The other driver just got back in. Most of the people were dozing or just waking because we had stopped and were changing drivers. And a noise started. And it's a little hard to describe. But you've heard that old phrase, the cry of the banshee. Well, it kind of sounded like, the closest normal, natural sound to it would be like the wail of a steam engine's whistle. But it didn't start. It was like it came within earshot. In other words, it was a steady, high-pitched noise traveling towards us at significant speed. So we couldn't hear it at first. Then we started hearing it distance, but it was getting near us fast. And you know, you don't want to rush when you're putting contacts in your eyes. You poke your eyes out. And I was in the headlamps, you know, doing this, and doors open, and no other traffic around, and this noise, like some freight train was bearing down on us, and people in the truck were saying, hurry up, get going!" And I jumped back into the driver's seat, jammed it into gear, and started off. It was really scary. And I thought, wait a minute, what's this? And I stopped. And I said, what's just happened? And people were really shaking with fear, you know. I said, we just heard a noise, right? If that's the best the enemy can do, we're pretty safe, don't you think? And so we just thanked the Lord Jesus for being who he is, that we're safe in his arms and everything's okay, and we traveled on into Kabul. Remember, if the enemy or anything can make you afraid, he defuses you. He takes that power of the Lord Jesus within you, because fear and love, and the love of Jesus is power, and the power of Jesus is love. Fear and love are incompatible, right? So if you can supplant or displace the love of God and the power of Jesus with fear of the enemy, then you are diffused. There's no more power within you. So we realized that's what was going on, and it didn't work. So we went on into Kabul, and yeah, there were a lot of stories over that summer. You know, we met so many demonized young people. In fact, as it seemed to us that virtually everybody who had got to the various ashrams and gurus in India and had come back through Afghanistan, that was probably over half. They had come back from India. Virtually everybody who'd done that journey was demonized. And they were under tremendous bondages. Many suicidal young people. Some who were so determined. We lived on the 6th floor of this unfinished building. It was a funny building because, you know, 6 floors up, and they poured slabs out for balconies, but there were no rails around them. Not a good place to have suicidal people. You know? I mean, you know, people who were really serious. We'd have to have 24-hour watches on people, and lots of stories about it. But in the end, everybody who wanted to be free that summer got free. And others who would have died there were saved, and their health was restored. We were able to, because we had nurses on our team, we were able to send them back to their families. And some of the people who came to the Lord ended up being significant missions leaders. One of our leaders, our senior leader in France for many years, came to the Lord that summer. And we went back with a sense that, for me especially, you know, having messed up so much the year before, that God gave me a second chance. And it was a very gracious second chance. Put really good people around me, gave me an excellent team, provided marvelously for me, so that having experienced failure, I could experience fruitfulness and know that that God could still use me. And that's really important, isn't it? So whatever part of the growth pattern you're in, whether you're feeling a failure or whether you're feeling that you're very fruitful, remember, God uses failure. And remember, He will make you fruitful if you just put the failure behind you and trust Him again. So we got all the way to the end of the summer of 1971. And it's only taken us several hours. So we'll finish with that, and another time we'll pick it up from there. Thanks.